Ibrahim Hooper, does the Muslim community in America have anything to fear in relation to what happened in London?
Well, we're not seeing the kind of backlash that we saw, for instance, after the 9/11 attacks. Just before I came into the studio, I got a call from a community in the Midwest. A burning Quran was thrown through a window of a mosque overnight. So we're investigating that. I got another report last night of vandalism of a prayer area in Texas. So, you know, we're seeing it, but we're not seeing it to the extent that we saw after 9/11.
What do you think is the proper response from the Muslim community at this time in relation to the attacks?
Well, I think the Muslim community responded very well. Every major American Muslim organization issued statements condemning the attacks. We did, Muslim Public Affairs Council, Islamic Society of North America, Islamic Circle of North, just, you know, everybody out there who's anybody issued condemnations of the attack. And we tried not to emphasize, you know, fear that there would be a backlash. That's always there, but when you have tragic events like in London, you know, that's the last thing that's on people's minds.
I'd like you to respond to Thomas Friedman, who wrote about this in an article in an op-ed yesterday. He wrote that I think it would be a disaster. It is essential that the Muslim world wake up to the fact that it has a jihadist death cult in its midst. If it does not fight that death cult, that cancer within its own body, politic, it is going to infect Muslim-Western relations everywhere. Only the Muslim world can root out a death cult. It takes a village.
Well, I think I would challenge his premise a little bit. He seems to indicate that Muslims haven't done anything to condemn terrorism around the world, that there's nothing being done. There is a lot being done in many Muslim countries. We get this same complaint here in America. When I go on a radio talk show or anything like that, the first question is, why haven't Muslims in America condemned terrorism? And myself, I've written dozens of condemnations of terrorism. I know every other Muslim group condemns terrorism. We've done everything we can think of to condemn terrorism, and sometimes still people aren't hearing it. So, you know, I don't know what the answer is to that.
Is the reaction and the condemnation coming from only a few leaders within the community, or is this a mass of people coming out?
In fact, we put out a call after the London bombings for imams or prayer leaders at mosques around the country to condemn terrorism in their Friday sermons. You know, Friday is the Muslim congregational day of congregational prayer. And from what we're hearing, that was done.
Why are Muslims attracted, for those who involve themselves in terrorist activity, why are they attracted to it?
You know, you're talking to the wrong guy. I don't understand why anybody would be attracted to doing those kinds of things, because they're clearly un-Islamic. They're clearly forbidden in Islam to attack civilians. So I'm clueless as to why they would do it, and I'm clueless as to what they think they would be accomplishing other than just creating divisions between people around the world. Because otherwise, you know, what motivation would you have for doing something like that?
What has been the relationship here in the United States stemming out of September 11th between the relationship between the Muslim community and other communities? Has it improved in the years leading from it?
In terms of outreach to other minority groups, or how do you mean?
In terms of reaction as far as how we saw the Muslim communities just stemming right from it, and have those perceptions changed over the years?
I think it's two sides to the coin. There's been a tremendous amount of outreach by the Muslim community and outreach from other groups in our society. We've built relationships with other religious and minority groups. For an interesting side note, Muslims and Sikhs in America have become much closer together because Sikhs have suffered as well as Muslims in terms of backlash, because Sikhs wear turbans, the male Sikhs wear turbans, and they've been killed in the backlash after a variety of events. So we're seeing a lot more coalition building. We're seeing outreach from both directions.
Our guest is going to be with us until the top of the hour. You can ask him questions. We're talking about the Muslim reaction to the London terror attacks and what that means for also Muslims in the United States. 202 is the area code for all of our lines this morning. If you support Democrats, it's 737-0002. If you support President Bush, 737-0001. If you support others, 628-0205. And if you live outside the United States, a number for you as well, 202-628-0184. You can also email us at journal@cspan.org. You said the mosque were actively involved in condemning this act.
Yes, and we're encouraging people in mosques, particularly the imams, the prayer leaders, to condemn terrorism. And it's not like that hasn't been done before, but we just want to repeat it whenever possible when there's an incident like we've seen in London.
Does that condemnation come only from those in the United States, or is it equally done so in other countries as well from the mosque?
Well, from what I'm hearing, there's equal condemnation around the Muslim world. Of course, you're always going to have a tiny fringe minority who carries out these kinds of acts. But the key is to deal with the majority of Muslims, to deal with those people who will go their whole lives and never be associated with an act of violence or terrorism or political instability. And those are the people you want to engage. You're never going to convince that tiny minority of violent people that they shouldn't do what they're going to do. You should just make sure that they're marginalized within the community and that you're working with the mainstream community.
What kind of efforts, when you say working with the mainstream community, specifically, what kind of things are you doing in order to build an understanding and to keep those from entering the fringe, as you called it?
Well, again, people say, well, why don't you speak to these people and tell them not to do that? Believe me, they're not going to listen to me any more than they'll listen to somebody else. They would just as soon attack me as, someone who's, lost to the faith as anyone else. So it's a difficult situation. That's why you have to focus on dealing with the majority mainstream community.
Joplin, Missouri, you're up first for our guests. Go ahead.
Hi, I was just calling. I just want to say that a lot of people are blaming Islam and Muslims, but they need to look at the individual it's the person that takes the bomb, puts it there. It's that person that's messed up, not the religion. And I spent a year in Baghdad in the military, and there was a lot of that Sunnis blowing up Shiite Muslims, each other's mosques, and it's not so much the religion as it is the individuals that set the religion, that are in the religion. You understand what I'm saying? It's the individuals that are messed up in the head. It's those terrorists that give the religion a bad name. And I'm sorry, it has to be for the Islam and Muslim nation, but that's the way it is. Thanks.
Mr. Hooper.
Yeah, that's what we always say, is that you need to see the reality of the Muslim experience, not only in this country but worldwide. The vast majority of Muslims around the world are never going to be associated with an act of violence. That's the reality. The abnormal situation is where you have a tiny minority of people who are carrying out these violent acts.
Where within the faith do they get the basis for carrying out these acts?
In any faith can be distorted to lead to these kinds of things. We've seen Christianity go through these periods. We've seen, Tamil Tiger suicide bombers in Sri Lanka. We've seen a Serb extremists cutting off 2 fingers of Muslims in Bosnia so that they'll be in a permanent Trinity salute. These kinds of things can happen in any faith, and unfortunately right now some of it's happening in the Islamic world.
Los Angeles, California.
Yeah, I would just like to comment to people who describe Islam as a religion of peace, that chapter 8 of the Quran is called the spoils of war. And I'm quoting from verse 12 of chapter 8 of the Quran, and that verse reads, "When your Lord revealed to the angels, 'I am with you, therefore make firm those who believe. I will cast terror into the hearts of those who disbelieve. Therefore strike off their heads and strike off every fingertip of them.'" That is from the Quran. And incidentally, both extremists and so-called moderates all use the same book. There is only one Quran, and I've just quoted you a chapter from the Quran.
Mr. Hooper.
Well, as I said, any religious text can be distorted. Very often the quotes like these that you hear are related to specific incidents at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and it's describing things that were occurring in times of warfare. But the same person could go to Deuteronomy in the Bible and find verses about the destruction of entire cities where every man, woman, and child is slain, even the cattle are slain, and all these things. It's how people express their faith. If, we're often told that Muslims are supposed to go and kill all non-Muslims. Well, if that were the case, why can a Muslim man marry a Christian or a Jewish woman? Why are there tens of millions of Christians and Jews living quite peacefully in the Muslim world? Have Muslims somehow forgotten that they're supposed to massacre all these people? No, because that's not what we're taught.
Laurel, Maryland, good morning. Go ahead.
Good morning. Two questions. The first one is, what is being done to stem or eliminate the Wahhabi influence in mosques in America? The second one is, I think that women would have a significantly moderating influence on the religion, and when will women be allowed to equally participate in all the affairs of a mosque, particularly in America? Thank you.
Well, as far as the women's issue, we recently distributed a booklet called a Women-Friendly Mosque to create a better atmosphere and better access for Muslim women in mosques in America. Recommends such things as making sure that women have access to all areas of the mosque, that they are on the boards of the mosque, they're in the decision-making process of whatever mosque there is, because there is an issue. Some people don't follow Islamic guidelines and give full rights to women, and that's something that we're dealing with. The so-called Wahhabi influence. People should know that no Muslim on earth calls themselves a Wahhabi. This is one of those hot-button terms that's been thrown up there. When people don't like something about Islam, they label it Wahhabi. Therefore, it's much easier to criticize it without looking like you're criticizing Islam. I've been in dozens of mosques in America, have talked to hundreds and thousands of people. I'm not seeing it out there. Maybe it's there in some small mosque somewhere. I'm not seeing it.
Toronto, Canada.
Good morning, sir. Actually, I am an old father who lived in Muslim countries and done business, and this is. I found them the most honorable, most trustworthy people.
We've lost him.
We lost him.
Yeah, let's go to Windsor, Connecticut. Windsor, Connecticut, good morning.
Lost Connecticut, too.
One more time. Boca Raton, Florida. Good morning.
Yes, good morning.
Morning.
Mr. Hooper, I wanted to quote you something from an article that I read recently in a book called The Jerusalem Alternative. The article was a compendium, and Reverend Evans had been interviewing Crown Prince Khalid in Saudi Arabia, and he was talking about the fanatic fringe of the Muslim world, and he quotes, and I quote from the book, he said, don't exaggerate, no more than 10% of the Muslim population are fundamentalists. Well, call me a taxi. That means there are only 100 million Islamics who want to kill Americans instead of 1 billion. I don't find that very comforting. What I'm trying to point out is there's a long and illustrious history. I mean, if you take a look, Jordan, under King Hussein, the elder of blessed memory, killed 10,000 PLO and transferred the population to Lebanon. In Assad, Syria, he killed 25,000 Muslim Brotherhood members at Hama. And, of course, the war between Iraq and Iran cost 1 million Muslim casualties and deaths. And what I'm trying to get across to you is that it appears as if the Muslims can't get along with the Muslims, how are they going to get along with the Western democracies? And of course, the codes of Hudaybiyah and the Treaty of Quraysh is always brought up as a way of saying we'll talk peace, but ultimately, when we get strong enough, we'll destroy you.
Ibrahim Hooper.
Well, I think, first of all, you have to analyze some of the examples you gave. Very little to do with religion in any of those cases. When the Iran-Iraq war started, it had nothing to do with religion. It had to do with, Saddam Hussein invading his neighbor. The Palestinian-Jordanian question has very little to do with religion, nothing to do with religion, really. It has to do with people being expelled from their homes and being forced into a neighboring country where they didn't quite fit too well, and that caused friction. And, so very often we attribute all of these violent activities to Islam when they have nothing whatsoever to do with Islam.
Jacksonville, Florida, you're next.
Yes, I heard you say a few minutes ago that there are many Muslim men who marry Christian and Jewish women. Yet not the other way around. You don't have Christian and Jewish men marrying Muslim women. I don't even think that's allowed. Why is that? It doesn't seem very fair.
Well, no.
Also, number two, you mentioned that there are non-Muslim minorities living in Islamic countries. I'm aware of that, but of course, one country that does not allow non-Muslims to live is Saudi Arabia. And apparently I read an article that Muhammad, on his deathbed, said there is to be only one religion in Arabia. And after he died, the Christian and Jewish communities living in Arabia were either killed, expelled, or forced to convert. What do you have to say about both those questions?
Well, in Saudi Arabia, if you go there today, you'll see thousands and perhaps millions of people who aren't Muslim from many parts of the world living and working quite peacefully in Saudi Arabia. The marriage issue, the reason that's traditionally given for not allowing a Muslim woman to marry a non-Muslim man is that the children, we believe, would then be raised in another faith, and we're concerned that the children be raised as Muslims.
What's the Muslims' reaction to the whole, as far as Osama bin Laden? Has there been a fatwa to call out against him?
Well, I've heard of a fatwa out of Spain, but this whole fatwa business, the fatwa seems to mean to many people a death sentence. That's not what it is at all. All a fatwa is like, in the United States, it might be compared to an attorney general's opinion. You ask somebody with knowledge about a specific question, and they give you a recommendation. That's all it is.
And there's none been issued against Osama bin Laden?
Not that I know of.
And do you think there should be?
Again, that would reduce the whole concept of fatwa to, pronouncing death sentences on people. Obviously, what Osama bin Laden is doing is wrong. He should be stopped. He should be captured. He should be punished, whatever. But, you can do that. You don't need a fatwa to do that.
Ibrahim Hooper is with the Council on American-Islamic Relations and our guest for the next 20 minutes. Centerville, Virginia, good morning. You're next.
Hi, good morning. My question regarding what we're talking about in the subject of Islam today is regarding the fact the orthodoxy that exists in Islam is making these people believe in this jihad movement. And on top of that, not only is the orthodoxy in Islam, but we look at the orthodoxy in Christianity and also in Judaism that make people believe in the same way, in the same thing by reacting in a certain way which does not respect the other religion. In order, I think, to understand the religion of Islam, which I think is a very misunderstood religion today, people have to look away from the Orthodox movement that is out there and try to look at the real religion, not only of Islam, but Christianity and Judaism. And I think you will see that the real religion does not preach these violent ways of practicing.
Mr. Hooper.
Well, I agree. The real Islam doesn't preach violence. The real Islam preaches getting along with people. At the time of the Prophet Muhammad, he had delegations of Christians come and visit him. The early Muslims, some of them fled for protection, to seek protection under a nearby Christian kingdom. So there have always been good relations. The Prophet issued an edict protecting a monastery in Sinai. When he went into the city of Medina, he wrote a treaty of agreement with the Jewish community to protect the Jewish community in Medina, that each would have equal rights and responsibilities. So this has a long tradition in Islam, interfaith relations and tolerance of other faiths. When Muslims took Jerusalem after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, the leader of the Muslims at that time, when it came to pray, they were very near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And his followers said, okay, let's go into the church and pray. And because Muslims respect Jesus and love Jesus. And he said, no, I'm not going in there, because if I go in there as leader of the Muslims everywhere, people will turn this into a mosque. So they prayed out in the street. That's the kind of respect and tolerance we saw from the very origins of Islam.
So he talked about the real religion and the Orthodox religion.
Well, this always brings up terminology: moderate, extremist, fundamentalist, all of these things. I'll get a call from a journalist and they say, I want to talk to a moderate Muslim. And I'd say, well, first, can you define what moderate means to me? And then I'll be able to tell you who to talk to. I believe I'm moderate, and I believe the people that I'm around in this country are moderate. But it all depends on your definitions.
Looking at definitions now, what would set a fundamentalist and a moderate apart?
Again, if fundamentalist means that you're a person trying to follow the fundamentals of your faith, I have no problem being called a fundamentalist. But if it's used as it is now as a pejorative, meaning an extremist who wants violence and to kill other people, again, it goes back to what's your definition of the term.
Go ahead.
For moderate, does moderate mean somebody who drinks beer and does things that they shouldn't as a Muslim, and maybe as a ham sandwich, and doesn't do this, and those are the kinds of things that we are often given as examples of moderation. And as a Muslim, you go, that's not moderation. Moderation is being balanced in your life, being balanced in what you do in terms of your faith. And the Prophet Muhammad himself recommended against going to extremes in faith, to one side or the other.
South Lake, Texas. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Hooper. I want to go back to two of the articles that the host brought up kind of as a lead-in to this segment, where he talked about two things. Number one was the New York Times op-ed concerning the kind of the opinion of the op-ed writer that there was a cult of death living inside of the Muslim community, and also the reaction from the new imam of the London mosque, where he has extolled his parishioners to help the police identify the terrorists. Now, when you were asked earlier about the reaction of the Muslim community in America to this, you talked about how all the different groups had been very forthright and forthcoming in immediately condemning this kind of act. But what kind of actions are you also taking to help try to weed out the terrorists that may be living amongst you in your communities, helping the FBI and the other law enforcement agencies find these folks? Thank you very much for taking my question.
Well, that presumes that there's, sleeper cells all over in the American Muslim community, and I don't think that's the case. We often tell Muslims in this country, if you see something you think is suspicious, if you know of criminal activity or potential criminal activity, immediately report it to the nearest office of the FBI. That's not the problem. The problem is protecting civil liberties while you're maintaining security, and that's what the balance that we try and strike. You want people to have their legal rights. You want them to have the right to an attorney, because the vast majority of people in the country that the FBI or law enforcement authorities talk to have done nothing wrong. They need their legal rights protected. If anybody sees something that is suspicious, report it. We encourage that.
The caller referenced the article we started off with just for information's sake. It was Thomas Friedman. It was in yesterday's New York Times. If it's a Muslim problem, it needs a Muslim solution is the title. Again, from yesterday's New York Times, Kingston, New York.
Hello, am I on?
Yes, go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Hooper.
Morning.
I'd just like to start off by saying that I did work at Ground Zero in 2001, and I know for a fact that Muslims were killed there or murdered there, just like they were in London, and that I apologize for any of the incidents that do happen. That you know, we have radicals here too, but I think the instances that do happen are few and far between. And I know Muslim people, and they seem to be pretty decent folks. And the point I'm trying to make is that, you know, you're saying that, you know, you're trying to cooperate and all that. Well, you know, talking the talk is fine, but now you got to walk the walk. And this is my country, and I do like it. Don't like all of it about it, but anyway, I lost my train of thought for a second.
No, but the presumption is always that there are Muslim terrorists running around America, and all we have to do is point our fingers and identify them to the FBI. That isn't the case. You know, what can we do to make people understand that that isn't the case? If people know of something, if they saw something suspicious, report it. You know, we demand that American Muslims do this, but we don't presume that all Muslims are terrorists in America or potential terrorists.
In one of the articles this morning about young Muslims especially being recruited into jihadist movements, it quotes Shireen Hunter at CSIS. It says that Muslims of Turkish origin are far less prone to violent radicalism than those who come from North Africa and other parts of the Arab world. Are there differing parts of the world where you find maybe more jihadists than most, as far as she pointed out North Africa and the Arab world? I mean, are you going to find maybe more of the jihadist Muslims there than other parts of the world?
Well, you know, I'd have to research her premise. I don't know that what she's saying is accurate. You know, we have problems in different parts of the Muslim world. Maybe there haven't been conflicts in Turkey like there have been in the Middle East. We've had ongoing decades-long conflict in the Middle East of one form or another, whether it's Iran, Iraq, Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, all of these situations that breed instability and discontent, and that's exploited by the terrorists. Whereas Turkey has been relatively stable for the last, 75 years.
One of the other premises put out is that the terrorism stems from those who live in economically poor, economically disadvantaged parts of the world, are striking against those more of the populated, not so much populated, but more economically better off. Does that stem into?
Yeah, I haven't really ever believed in that theory either, because you saw, for example, the 9/11 hijackers. These weren't poor people. These were, in many cases, educated people who, did what they did not out of, hostility because of their circumstances.
Miami, Florida. Good morning.
Good morning. Mr. Hooper is talking a very good game. However, I know the Quran inside and out. For one thing, as a woman, I'm very concerned that Islam does not speak to modern women or women's equal rights. For one thing, Surah 431 says that all women are inferior and should submit to women. Surah 438 says that if a woman does not submit, she should be beaten with a green stick. This war is about what Muslim men think about women and the whole world in general, and all of Islam says that the world will submit to Islam. This is a religious war, and it's a war cult. It's more than just a death cult. It's a war cult. And there's many ways in which to make the world submit. It's not just blowing up people in buses. It's by conversion. It's by immigration. It's by breeding. It will take centuries. Just remember that in a mere 1,400 years, they have managed to create 1.6 billion people. Now, how did they do that?
Mr. Hooper.
Well, I think, this is just an example of the unfortunate growing level of anti-Muslim rhetoric in our society. To speak to the women's issue, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, came and liberated women from a chattel status that they had at the time that he came. One of the first things he did was outlaw the female infanticide. They used to think pre-Islam that a girl baby was a useless mouth to feed. They forbid that as something that couldn't be done. The Prophet, his first wife was a rich businesswoman who asked him to marry her. He gave many rights, and Islam gives many rights to women. If they're not, if women are suffering in parts of the Muslim world, it's not because of Islam, it's in spite of Islam.
How do you put that in perspective when you have a woman like our class caller quoting verses at you from the Quran?
Yeah, I mean, those verses were not accurate translations and were taken out of context. They're so often in the Quran, it refers to the rights and responsibilities of men and women specifically. Men and women should do this. Men and women, and throughout the Quran. Islam is a liberating philosophy for women and for all people.
About 8 more minutes with our guest, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Good morning. You are next.
Hello. How you doing? My name is Brandon Lewis. Good morning, Mr. Hooper.
Morning.
I just have something to say. Me personally, I believe that there's so many terrorists in this world now is because in their younger years, I think that they were sort of blocked out from the rest of the world views and their standpoints. What are you guys doing personally, as you personally or your committee doing to address this younger crowd? Because mainly the younger crowd are actively terrorism. They're trained at these younger ages in their lives to reject other viewpoints and reject other people's opinions. What are you guys doing to focus on this younger crowd to prevent any more terrorists becoming active in this role?
Active in, where did he say?
Caller, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Go ahead and ask.
You said active in some location.
Active throughout the world, actually.
Oh, okay. Again, the premise seems to be that, there's just millions and millions of Muslims around the world with, bloodlust, just waiting to kill people. I would challenge that premise again. The vast majority of Muslims worldwide want nothing to do with terrorism, are revolted by the actions they see in London and other parts of the world. You could probably number the people who are carrying out these things in the hundreds and thousands around the world out of a population of more than 1.2 billion. So I don't think it's fair to generalize to more than 1 billion people based on the actions or beliefs of a handful of people.
How would you rate the administration's outreach to the Muslim community?
To the Muslim community in America or around the world?
Starting with America, but around the world.
It could be much better in America. There's a reluctance, I think, to engage the mainstream American Muslim community, and it has a lot to do with the fact that those in decision-making positions tend to be very conservative, and they, in many ways, want to marginalize the mainstream community. There's a lot of work in the international arena. I mean, at our office, we receive delegations almost daily through the State Department from Muslim countries, where the State Department is bringing people in to meet with American Muslims, meet with officials. So there are things going, but it could obviously improve.
Staten Island.
Yes, Mr. Hooper, I have a question for you. Is it true that the Islamic Relations of America at once was supporting Hamas and Islamic Jihad? And if that's true, it's pretty hard for one terrorist group to call another terrorist group a terrorist. Mm-hmm. And number two is that the leader of the Islamic Jihad, Relations of America, had said in a meeting not too long ago that John Ashcroft should be shot at his house. Mm-hmm. Now, this came from your leader of your group.
Okay, can I answer? First of all, we've never supported any group, whether it's Hamas or Islamic Jihad. They're terrorist organizations listed as such by the State Department. We have no relationship with them, never have issued anything in our 11-year history that could be remotely indicating support for anything they've done. In fact, we've issued numerous condemnations of suicide bombing within Israel and the occupied territories. It's just one of those smears that's out there. I'm sorry you've fallen prey to it. The quote you mentioned, I'm aware of that quote. It wasn't from anybody associated with our organization. I think you should check your source. That was from another organization.
How did you become a Muslim?
Well, that's an interesting question. Just reading, studying, just over a long period of time. For some people, they read one verse of the Quran and they want to become Muslim. For me, I'm a bit skeptical, so I would read and study and travel. And after a while, you say, this all makes sense, so, I should adopt it.
Did you adopt from one religion to another when you?
Well, I was Presbyterian and, just not any special, level of Presbyterian, just you kind of go to church occasionally person. And just studied Islam and accepted it.
And it's academic, but is there a formalized process for becoming a Muslim?
It takes about 10 seconds. All you have to say is you repeat the phrase, there's no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God, and if you believe it, you're a Muslim.
Last call for you is from Toronto, Canada.
Good morning. I'm an old fellow. I lived and spent time, done business in Muslim countries, and I found them the most honorable, most trustworthy people. Now, you can't blame the Tim McVeigh or the Hitlers or the Jim Jones of the world on the Christianity. I'm a Christian myself. The other thing is, for example, clinic bombing in the U.S., that you can't say, oh, that's extremistic Christian, or that's... The other thing is people take the Quran or Bible or whatever, and they translate it to their convenience. That lady who called, she said, first of all, she didn't even pronounce the word right. She really knows the Quran. And I studied all the religions. The other thing is what I found is it's a much deeper issue than... I'm ashamed to say, and I have a lot of friends who are Americans, they think they know, but they're brainwashed by Fox and other stations. They are extremely shallow when it comes to Islam. They know nothing. They just, what they heard on the radio or media, they repeat that. The other thing is, Mr. Hooper, appreciate folks like you. I think the U.S. should reach out and get more Muslims to educate those morons, Americans mostly, not all morons, but a lot of them are very shallow. And the other thing is, it's a much deeper issue there with all...
Oops, we lost... Can I give one last plug for, we want to educate people. Anyone who goes to our website can order a free Quran. And our website is www.cair.com, CAIR.com. They can get a free Quran, read it for themselves, judge for themselves.
How's your organization funded?
Just like any nonprofit, we do fundraising drives, we do dinners, we do, anybody who wants to donate can donate. No governments donate.
Ibrahim Hooper is with the Council on American-Islamic Relations. Thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks for having me.
From the Washington Times and its front page about Chinese textiles, it has hit the